It's been a while. I was starting to think that I was never gonna make another video, but then I remembered that that is 100% up to me. So let's do another one. Hello there, I'm Simon, welcome to my channel. Today's topic is once again Avatar: The Last Airbender. Specifically, I want to talk a little more about Uncle Iroh. He is probably the most beloved character, and it's easy to see why. He's a tea-loving mentor, who's also a complete badass. And also a war criminal. Maybe. It's a common criticism that you see online, that despite how lovable Iroh is, we shouldn't forget that he also used to be a general in the Fire Nation army, and in that capacity, he's a war criminal. But is he? What does it actually mean to be a war criminal? We probably shouldn't be throwing that term around lightly. So what are the criteria? When is someone considered a war criminal? Well, the simple answer is that a war crime is just anything that goes against the rules of war. That makes sense, right? Except, what are the rules of war? Is there an arbiter? Are there like points? Well, yes, actually. Well, there's no points, but there are rules. And you could say that there is a sort of arbiter. There's surprisingly many similarities with soccer. A lot more than there should be. Anyway, what are the rules of war? And who's responsible for them? Well, it starts at the very end of the 19th century. The world was being controlled by a couple of powerful nations, who were pretty much empires at this point. So politics and diplomacy were getting to a global scale. On top of that, industry was also growing and evolving. And those two factors combined to create an arms race. I mean, political conflicts had always been handled with warfare, so obviously these powers were going to use all the industry they had access to get the best weapons on the board. And people were starting to realize that if any of these powers were to get involved in a war at this point, which they probably would, it would be global. And it would be bad. So starting in the 1880s, pacifist organizations started coming together to talk about making sure that all of this wouldn't escalate into the apocalypse. And so in 1899, all the important leaders of the powers that ruled the world came together in Den Haag, aka The Hague in English, to talk it all through. And one of the big topics they talked about was the so-called laws of war. The basic idea was, peeps, nations are going to go to war. We can't stop them from doing that. It's to be expected. We can only hope to keep it within some limits of humanity. And this isn't just the 1899 Convention of Den Haag, by the way. There was another one in 1907, and they kept debating in the Geneva Conventions as well. So this was a big thing. And of course, as time went on, technology evolved, and so they kept updating it. And eventually in 1977, there were the Geneva Additional Protocols. And anyone who finds themselves waging a war and does things that go against those protocols is a war criminal. And there's an entire criminal court in Den Haag which is responsible for dealing with war crimes. But this video is supposed to be about General Iroh. And it may surprise you to hear that no Iroh of the Fire Nation has ever been convicted by the Den Haag court. And the reason is obvious. It doesn't exist in the Avatarverse. Den Haag and Geneva don't exist in that world, let alone their conventions and protocols. So strictly speaking, Uncle Iroh is not a war criminal. Not in the way we understand it in our modern, not fictional world. Let's be honest, that's not the question we're asking. Of course, our criteria don't actually apply to Iroh. That doesn't mean that we can't apply them to him anyway. Call it a thought experiment. Iroh going to court over war crimes is something that is never going to happen. But what if it did? Would he get convicted? Does he satisfy the conditions of being considered a war criminal? The thing is that we don't have a lot of details about what he actually did in his time as a general. We do know that he was a general in the Fire Nation army during the 100-Year War. And that he did take it seriously, because he wanted to make his family proud, and he believed he deserved it and all that. but I haven't found any statistics or anything about everything that happened during the war, because apparently even the Avatar world building isn't that deep, which makes sense. But that does make it hard to know how many people were killed under Iroh's command, and how. And the how is important, because killing people during a war is in itself not a war crime. Soldiers die during wars, it's kinda part of the deal. Now, it's possible that within the context of the Avatarverse, Iroh undeniably committed something that's considered a war crime. Like, it's possible that he did things in the line of what he would have considered his duty, that the laws of war consider a crime, and that we just don't know about, because the show never felt the need to tell us about it. I very much doubt that he would do such a thing, because this is already the Iroh who lied to save the dragons, and who traveled around to learn from the other bending styles. So I doubt that such a character would allow for atrocities to happen. The thing is that we don't know for sure. We don't have the data to judge one way or the other. The only campaign we really know anything about is the Siege of Ba Sing Se. As you know, Iroh was in charge of the Siege of Ba Sing Se, and after 600 days of sieging it, he finally managed to break through the outer wall. Only to realize that there's a whole inner wall left as well. Also, he just found out his son died, so he kinda just gave up. He did set up camp in the agrarian zone within the outer wall, but this is pretty much all we know about the siege. It's possible that there was some needless destruction going on, but the sources don't mention it, and it can be easily argued that it would have been necessary for military purposes, which is like the only exception to those rules. Like, a lot is allowed if it's unavoidable for military purposes. It's just good luck convincing anyone that killing all the air nomads, or performing the R word on anyone at all, is ever unavoidable for military purposes. The thing is that there's no way to know whether or not any of that happened. So in itself, none of what we know about the siege was a war crime. But it is thin ice. It is very easy to lay siege in a way that is definitely a war crime. It's possible that he might have used some kind of biological weaponry. For example, dropping some kind of poison in the water supply was a common strategy, so it's possible that Iroh would have used it if he had access to the water supply. I can't find anything about Ba Sing Se having a water supply, so I don't know. He also might have cut off the supply chains into the city, in an attempt to starve the citizens to force them into surrender. The thing is that Ba Sing Se doesn't seem to really care about that, because it's basically self-sufficient. Also, if he'd done either of those, and if they had worked, that would be considered targeting innocent inhabitants, which is quite definitely a war crime. But there's no proof that he tried that, and if he did, it certainly didn't work. So as far as I can see, there is no canonical proof that Iroh committed any war crimes at all. It's definitely possible, but there's not enough data to make a call either way. Except, why did he lay siege on the city in the first place? It's a city, a big city, where a lot of people live. Bringing the war there is definitely going to result in a lot of collateral damage. And for what? What possible military necessity could there be to attack that? Admittedly, it is the capital of the Earth Kingdom, and the king is there, but is that enough? I mean, they already ruled the rest of the Earth Kingdom, so the position of the king was basically just ceremonial at this point. The king didn't even know there was a war going on. Ba Sing Se and the Earth King were pretty much a MacGuffin at this point, and I'm not sure that's enough of a justification for a siege. This was not a military necessity. This was about prestige. Even if that's enough of a justification for the siege, I doubt that it would have been enough to justify the destruction and the killing, probably also the pillaging and R-wording that would likely have followed if they had conquered Ba Sing Se by force. So in conclusion, Uncle Iroh probably wasn't a war criminal, but he almost was. He would have been had he been successful. I think that'll do for today. time for the YouTube thing. You know the drill, it's in the end screen. If you don't know what to comment, how about this? What do you think? Does Iroh seem like the kind of person who would have committed or allowed war crimes, even during his time as a general? And if he were a war criminal, would that change how you feel about him? Or has he redeemed himself with everything he does in the show? Let us know all that down below. And now, thanks for watching.